Hey there, this is Steve. I'm kind of going to hurry because I guess in my office here downstairs, they're going to have a choral group, and that's going to make it difficult to continue the live feed. But I do want to get this teaching out there. So today we're going to talk about lepers. And so that means there's going to be a whole ton of reading from Leviticus. So I hope you guys are ready to read like chapters and chapters from Leviticus, because it's important background in order to, I won't do that to you, I promise. No Leviticus. I mean, the thing is that, you're wondering what kind of a Bible teacher are you? I'll tell you the kind of Bible teacher are you. The kind of Bible teacher who will read Leviticus for you and tell you what it says, okay? So first, I'm going to read a passage from Luke chapter 5, verses 12 through 16. Luke 5, 12 through 16. Once again, if I'm in too much of a hurry, you pause it. You got all the time in the world. I don't. While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. And when he saw Jesus, he fell on his face on the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. And then Jesus ordered him, "Don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded you for cleansing as a testimony to them." Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that the crowds of people came to hear him, to be healed of all their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to the lonely places and prayed. All right, so first of all, let me say something about leprosy that isn't really kind of obvious from the text, that leprosy is not leprosy. We may have heard about leprosy, that it's a disease that numbs your ligaments, not your ligaments, your your hands and your feet and your arms and extremities. That's what I was thinking of. Okay, so it numbs your extremities. It has some white splotches on it and all that. That is only one of the many, 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 many kinds of leprosy that could be talking about. And it's actually not the most prevalent one, because leprosy actually is not easy to contract unless you're a child. But in the Bible, there's actually a long description of what leprosy is in Leviticus 13 and 14. Those are the passages that we are not reading today. But I'll tell you that actually when you look at it closely and you look at the very detailed symptoms that are given in there, that it could be what we now know as leprosy, which is actually now known as Hansen's disease. It could be that. But more likely, it is like a long-term infection, or it could be eczema, the rash that you get on your hands or other parts of your body because you don't have enough fat cells. Or the thing is that leprosy, a wall could get leprosy, or clothes could get leprosy. So it could be a mold or a fungus. There's all kinds of things that leprosy could be. And so the thing is that leprosy is not a disease at all. It's not something that is just straight catching, because it's very difficult for us to catch mold from a wall or things like that. So it's not something that's catching. It doesn't have anything to do with sin, and it doesn't have anything to do with evil. It is an uncleanness, and basically an uncleanness is something that is disgusting to the community. Just something disgusting. It's not an evil, but it is something that we don't want anything around. When I had kids, younger kids, I still have kids, they didn't die, excuse me. There was a church that we all went to, and all the kids got lice. And then after they got lice, then my wife and I got lice, and I got it last. And it's a little harder to get it because I have a lot of hair, in case you couldn't tell. And so it was hard to get to. And now Diane, my wife at this point, is really an expert at getting in there and getting lice out. I mean, she's really good at it. But this one particular Sunday, we couldn't guarantee that I didn't have any lice. So that meant that I was kicked out of the church for that Sunday. And next week I could come back if the lice was gone. And so I was out in the garden. I was pulling weeds. That's what I did at church that week. Anyway, the thing is that that's the kind of thing it is. Lice is disgusting. Lice is something that we don't like. But as soon as the person gets it done, then they're welcome back in the community. But until then, they need to leave. They need to leave the community. Absolutely not. But nevertheless, a person can feel isolated or whatever. It's so sad. No, it's okay. But it's something that is disgusting, something that separates us because it is disgusting. Now, here's an interesting fact about disgust. Did you know disgust is one of the only emotions that you actually have to learn? We have a space for it in our brain, but when we're born, we don't have anything in that area. We don't know that anything is disgusting, which is why sometimes you see babies eating poop. Because babies don't know what disgusting is. They don't have any idea. So they'll sometimes eat poop because they don't have anything else better to do. There's the poop. Might as well try it out. They have to be taught. Don't eat that. Children have to be taught that Teletubbies is really, really weird. They can't just come up with that on their own. And they have to be taught that people who are a different race than us that can't really be trusted as much. Those are things that have to be taught. They're not things that come naturally. Well, it is a good thing then that our society is past that. We're not part of that anymore. We don't have anyone in our communities that we consider disgusting because they hold to a different opinion, or because they're a different group, or because they crossed a border without documents. It's a good thing that we're not disgusted by people because they happen to vote for the wrong person or because they went to the wrong protest. No, good thing that we are way past that. Well, of course, that's not true. We have a lot of things that are disgusting. And in fact, actually, there is a sociologist, the kind of evil sociologist that I've talked about, the torturing kind. Her name is Dr. Susan Fiske. And she basically categorized instant responses to social groups. And she says that there are 4 basic categories. One of them is envy. So feeling like you wish that you could be them, or wish that you could have something like them. Like, oh, I want that professional status, or I wish I had all that money. That'd be the envy thing of instantly seeing a rich person. We might feel like that. Or there's the pity thing. Like, so we instantly see a person in a wheelchair, we see somebody crippled or something like that, and we feel pity for them. That's a loud one. Or another section is disgust, where we may see a person and we automatically feel disgust. And we have a lot of people that fit in that kind of a category. So for instance, she says that some people who are women on welfare, those are the kinds of people that would fit into the disgust category. People who are immigrants, undocumented immigrants, some immigrants more than others, would fit into the disgust category. People who are felons, people who are addicts. And also she said that the strongest group, this group that had the strongest reaction of all the ones that she tested, were homeless folks. That it was so strong that she couldn't even put them on the chart that they wanted. Because when people saw a homeless person, they saw them as trash, piles of trash. People that just need to be gotten rid of. That was the homeless. And so this is exactly how lepers were treated back in the ancient world. People who weren't really infectious, but they looked bad and they just weren't acceptable. So we wanted them out of our community. The way that you can tell whether a person or a group is disgusting to the community, the best way is that they can be pushed out of the community. Like there's a community that is given bus tickets, so that way they're not in our community anymore, but they go somewhere else. Or there's a community that where their children are separated from them and they're no longer allowed to be with their children anymore. Those are the people who are disgusting. The people who are not because the people harm their children, but because they live a lifestyle or did a thing that they consider to be unacceptable for children to be around. Okay, that's disgusting. We have those, but we have lepers here today in our world. just like they had lepers back in their world. Okay, so now here comes Jesus into a society with lepers, and a society that is filled with disgust for people that did nothing wrong. So a man approaches him, and he is a leper, and he is labeled and isolated and rejected by society. He comes up to Jesus and he says, Jesus, if you are willing, you can make me clean. So what is he actually saying? He's saying, Jesus, I know I'm disgusting. Frankly, you shouldn't even look at me. I'm a horrible piece of work, but I come to you to stand at a reasonable distance from you. In this case, he laid down on the ground, so that way he wouldn't do it. I'm laying down in front of you, so that way I don't even have to get close to you. Because if there's anybody who can take this horrible mark off of me, it's you. You can make me personal, acceptable to society again. But I understand if you don't. I understand that if you don't want to do that, I totally get that, because that's how disgusting I am. And so Jesus loves him in a great way. I mean, Jesus could have just snapped his fingers and said, whoop, okay, you're all gone. You're healed. And that would have been great. But Jesus did the second step, that extra step. And I love it when Jesus does that extra step, that extra thing. So he's not just healing people, he's really seeing what they need and providing the need. In this case, Jesus touches him. No one is supposed to touch an unclean person, whether that be a leper or a woman on her period, or nobody is supposed to touch them. It's unacceptable to touch an unclean person. And so for however many years he's been a leper, it could have been 1 year, could have been 20 years, let's just say it was 10 years. For 10 years, he had to run away from children who were playing. For 10 years, he had to stay away from the community. For 10 years, he hadn't been touched by a single human being. And now Jesus touches him. He puts his hand right on him. He hadn't had a hug. He hadn't had a handshake. He hadn't had an embrace from a loved one. He hadn't had a pat on the shoulder. He hasn't had any touch for 10 years. And so Jesus touches him and heals him. So that way the leprosy is no longer there. And Jesus says, okay, now do what the law says. Clean, and you'll be accepted back in the community. So go ahead, go on to the priest. And Jesus said that so that way the person would obey the law. And I say, and it's interesting that Jesus said that, because that really makes Jesus a hypocrite, because, and everyone's going, wait a minute, you're a preacher, you just called Jesus a hypocrite. I'm sorry, but you know, I got to call it like I see it. And Jesus is telling him to obey the law, that he just broke the law. Leviticus 5, verse 2 or 3 or 4, one of those verses, says you may not touch an unclean person. If you touch an unclean person, even by accident, then you will be held guilty and it will be a sin against you. But Jesus didn't do it by accident. Jesus did it on purpose. Now, if you did it by accident, there's a sacrifice, so that way you can get it cleansed. But if you did it on purpose, there's no sacrifice for that sin. And Jesus touched this unclean person on purpose. He did it just exactly. That was part of the plan. This was so crazy. It was so against the law. In fact, it could be called just a straight out sin. That there's another gospel that was written that talks about this same incident, and they don't have Jesus touching the leper. They don't have him touching it at all. In fact, they have the leper say that he had gone out and touched a bunch of lepers, and that's how come he got leprosy. And so Jesus, from a distance, heals the guy and then says, "Go and sin no more." That's the Jesus in that gospel. That Jesus strictly wants to follow the law. This Jesus said, nope, I'm going to break the law and I'm going to touch the guy in order to make him clean and to help him begin that restoration process into the community, to help him feel human. So why did Jesus do this? Why did he break the law? Why is that? So to tell you that, I'm going to tell you something else that seems like a little bit out of line, or seems like it's pointless to say this, but there was an argument between the Pharisees and the Sadducees at the time of Jesus. I know there was a lot of arguments, but this is one. And the argument was, suppose that there was a corpse on the ground, and look, it could be a dead animal. Okay, so there's a corpse of a dead animal on the ground, and then there's a stream that runs by and touches the dead corpse and then keeps going. And let's say you are walking by and you step into the stream. And the question is, the debate is, are you unclean or aren't you when you touch that stream? Because one group, the Pharisees, said, well, the stream touched the corpse, but the stream isn't unclean. It's the corpse that's unclean. The Sadducees said, well, but the stream touched the corpse, which makes that stream unclean. So if you touch the stream, then you too are unclean. That was the argument. Now, the thing is that both of them have an assumption that basically touching the corpse or touching something makes you unclean, that if you touch the wrong thing, then that's going to make you unclean. Now, Jesus had a different point of view. Jesus said in Mark chapter 7, what goes in you or whatever touches you is not what makes you unclean. It is what comes out of you. So it is your words and your actions. If you do evil words or evil actions, that makes you unclean, but not touching something or whatever. That just doesn't make you unclean. That was Jesus' pronouncement, and that was pretty radical. I mean, all Jews considered, and frankly, many Gentiles considered unclean things. You touch it, you're impure. And so Jesus touched this leper and broke the law, and because he didn't agree with the law's assumption that something unclean will make you impure. And the reason is this: because if you do an act of love, love cleanses. You cannot be made dirty in an act of love. Love can't be made impure. So Jesus did an act of love, an extra act of love, not only by healing the guy, but by touching him. And Jesus cannot be made unclean or impure by touching a person in love, in benefit to them. And in fact, love cleans. Love flowed out of Jesus to clean the infection in another person. And the infection is a very specific infection. It's not like we can go and start touching open wounds and they'll be healed and we'll not, because remember, this doesn't have to do with the medical diagnosis. It has to do with a community diagnosis, a community that a person who looks like that or a person who has these particular symptoms are not acceptable to our community, that they are disgusting. And so Jesus is saying that if we do acts of love to disgusting people, they no longer become disgusting. They become people who are acceptable. They are people who can be welcomed back into the community. This is what Jesus is saying, that love remakes a person so that way they are no longer offensive, no longer disgusting. And maybe we can change them, maybe we can't, but the fact is that they are no longer unclean. They are no longer a part of the disgusting people. This is how we deal with uncleanness. We battle it with open, clear acceptance of love. Not just from afar, but we connect with them and we treat them like family. And when they become family, then the people who accept us will also accept them. Now, there's one other actually passage about the lepers that I wanted to talk about, and that is in Luke 17. Where did I put it? Nope, not there. Hang on. Maybe you can find it. Luke 17, verses 11 through 19. So Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, it says in verse 11. Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee, and as he was going to a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. And they stood at a distance, and they called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." And when he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw that he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. And Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" And then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." And this is and so here you got 10 guys. They're proper lepers from afar. They're telling Jesus, "Hey, Jesus, can you help us?" He's like, "Sure. Go to the priest and tell him you're clean, and he'll look at you and he'll be fine." So they all started to go to the priest, and as they were going to the priest on their way, they realized, "Oh my goodness, we are clean. Wow, we're taken care of. We can go back home to our families and stuff like that." But one of them turned back, and Jesus says, "Well, what about the other one? I'm not going to get thank you from the other 9." The thing is that this, and Jesus knew this already, but it's okay. So the thing is that Jesus would tell one leper, "Oh, go to the priest," and the guy won't go to the priest. He'll go straight home. That happens. Sometimes Jesus will tell somebody he heals, "Hey, now don't tell anyone that I healed you," and then he goes and tells everyone. Sometimes they'll do other things, and people will even after he heals them, then they'll go and they'll start telling the authorities, "Oh, Jesus didn't heal me in a proper Jewish way. He did this on the Sabbath," or whatever. Then sometimes they won't come back and say thank you. Let's face it, being an outreach worker is a thankless job. Literally, there's so many times that you don't get a thank you. You don't get the basics that you would think that you ought to get. You're trying to help somebody and you say, "Okay, but I've got some boundaries," and they're going to cross those boundaries. Sometimes people will do things that you just think are so unacceptable. Jesus would say, "Go and sin no more," and then they would sin some more. It's going to change. Just because we sacrifice for others, it doesn't mean that they're going to do the same for us. That doesn't make any difference, though. It's the job that tells us to sacrifice for people. We shouldn't be expecting a bunch of things. Here's the thing. Remember, I told you just now that love creates purity. That love creates an opportunity to open up. The thing is that love always makes change, but maybe not in the person that you think ought to be changed. Sometimes we can love a person and we can help them and totally turn around their life, and then they don't accept it. They don't do anything about it. Sometimes that's the way it goes. A lot of times it's the way it goes. Sometimes we're going to help people and they're not going to say thank you, and that's okay. That's all right. But the thing is that, but love always changes someone. This story that we just read right here about these people, okay, so you got 10 lepers, one of them came back and said thank you. Somebody saw this incident and wrote it down, was impressed enough to write it down. So that way we can read it today. They saw the act of love and they said, "Hey, I need to tell other people about that. I need to act that way." And we can read it and we can say, yes, this is the kind of thing that we ought to do too. And so we can say, well, this person didn't say thank you, or this person didn't do what I said, but you know what? Somebody's watching. Somebody's paying attention. And somebody is going to change. Somebody is going to be transformed because of an act of love. We just may not know who that person is. All right. And I think that's all. So next week, my main teaching is actually going to be one that we've already got a recording on, about the feeding of the 5,000. So if you have already seen the feeding of 5,000, that's the teaching that's going to be next week. If you haven't seen that, well, now you've got a teaching for next week. So you're good. And I think that we went ahead and we got through this teaching before the singing started. So yes, we're doing good. Anyway, so I hope that you have a good night, a good week. And Lord bless you and keep you and give you peace.